Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jay, and in this video, I'll be showing you guys the difference between setTimeout and setInterval functions. Okay, I have created a simple project with two buttons. One has a setTimeout trigger and the other one has a setInterval function trigger. So before we talk about this, let's take a look at the project that we have so far. I have an HTML file which has styles.css and script.js files linked to it. And it has two buttons, and each of these buttons represents a timeout and an interval respectively. So we have on click there is a function that we are calling, and this function definitions are present on the script.js file. All right, so right now, as you can see, there is no logic within the these files, right? So those are empty files. I just have a declaration with the function name, and the body of the function is empty. So when I go back and click on it, nothing really happens, right? Now let's start with the timeout first. So set timeout and set interval are known as timing events. These are available within the browser, and these are not part of JavaScript language. So you need to clearly remember that this is part of web APIs. Web APIs is something that the browser provides. It is similar to what we have discussed in the Intersection Observer API tutorial, right? Intersection Observer API is not part of the JavaScript language, but it's part of the browser API. All right, now let's talk about set timeout first. Set timeout is a timing event that is called after a certain amount of time. So you can think of a timeout in any sport, right? If you are playing football, there is a timeout or a break that takes place while the game is going on. So it's very similar to that. So you want to set a timeout after certain number of seconds or whatever is the time unit that you want. Based on that, you want a timeout event to occur, right? So that's when you use a timeout. Whereas set interval is something which happens on an interval basis. So if you want to trigger something for every 10 seconds, that's when you can use a set interval. But if you want to trigger something after 10 seconds have passed, then you use the set timeout. That's the simple difference between them. Now let's take a look at how we can actually use those functions to manage timing events. So first and foremost, I'll go back to my call timeout function, and I'm going to be writing set timeout. So set timeout is an asynchronous function. So it takes in a callback. So the first parameter is a callback function. And the second one is a function which is a number that represents the time. So let's do this. The time is, let's say I'm going to call this after 5 seconds. So the second one, the timer option here is given in the form of milliseconds. So I'm going to give 5,000 milliseconds, which is 5 seconds. So let's save this. And within this, I'm going to be doing a console log of um, timeout has occurred after 5 seconds. So this is my message that I want to show on the console. So let's go back. And as you can see, nothing is going to happen right away because this function is only called when I click on the timeout button, set timeout button. So I'm going to be clicking on it. Now we will see a message here after 5 seconds. So 5 seconds have passed, and we are seeing a message that is part of the console log. That is, timeout has occurred after 5 seconds. All right, now let's go back and also add a similar functionality here. But in this case, for set interval, I'm going to be using set interval function, which is also an asynchronous function, which takes in a callback method and a time interval. So time interval is again a number. I'm going to be calling this function for every 2 seconds. Now I'm going to log this. Calling this function after 2 seconds. 2-second interval. So let's go back and click on this function or the button. Now it's going to be triggered for every 2 seconds. As you can see here, as this is a similar log, we are seeing the number of times this log is being printed on the browser. So this is what setInterval is. And if you do not stop this, it's going to be calling this function forever. So let me try and refresh this so that everything is going to reset. Now we will also look at how do we want to break this interval. If you want to stop this interval from occurring, you need to have some sort of mechanisms to do that. So first and foremost thing that we want to do is, let's talk about how we can stop a timeout, right? So let's do this. I'm going to save a variable here called let timeout handler. This is just going to be a simple declaration. And then I'm going to reference the timeout handler to my setTimeout function. So you can also reference setTimeout functions to a variable like this. Now let's try and re-trigger this button again and make sure that everything is still working. So the log has been printed after 5 seconds. Now using this, I want to um, basically clear the timeout. I don't want the timeout to execute. So how do we want to do that? There is a function called as clearTimeout. So let's create another call to action button. In this case, I'm going to say uh, clear timeout and add that logic in a new function. So I'll be creating this under the call timeout function just to keep them in one place. So the timeouts will be one below another. So call clear timeout. In this, I'm just going to get the reference. So first thing I'm going to do is clear timeout, and I'm going to get the reference of the timeout handler and then clear it. So when I do that, the timeout won't be executed. So let's do this. Let's also add a console log of saying clearing the timeout, clearing the set timeout. Let's call this. Okay. So now that we have saved this, let's try to re-trigger this first without clicking on the clear timeout and make sure everything is working. So the timeout has occurred after 5 seconds. Now, when I click on it again, and I'm going to click on this again. Sorry, what I've done was I clicked on the set timeout and then immediately clicked on clear timeout. Now, after 5 seconds, there won't be any new log that has occurred. So let's do that again. So I'm going to be clicking on set timeout now and immediately click on clear timeout. So what's happening is it's going to get hold of the handler, set timeout handler, and then clear the timeout so that the timeout is not going to execute after 5 seconds. All right. A clearer way will be, so in another function that we have here, the setInterval function, we are going to do a similar thing. So let's go to the top of the file and create a time interval handler. Let's call this, and let's assign this to a variable called time interval handler. Now the set interval has a reference here. So this function uh, is referred with this variable. Okay. As always, like I'm going to go back and I'll add another button under this to call clear interval. Clear interval. So this should create our fourth option here. Now let me go back and add the functionality here. So I'm going to click on set interval. So it's going to be triggered after every 2 seconds. But when I click on clear interval, we should be able to clear the interval. I mean, the interval that is being triggered for every two seconds should stop. So to do that, let's go back to our JavaScript and create our function here. So the function will be call clear interval. And in this, I'm going to do clear interval of the handler that we already have. So clear time interval handler. So this is going to have a message like clearing set interval. So I'm going to be clearing set interval when I click on this button. Okay, so let's go back. Now let me start off the interval. So it's going to be triggering after every two seconds. Now, after the fifth one, I want to clear this interval. So as you can see, even after 2 seconds have passed, after the fifth time it has logged, it has stopped the interval. So because we have triggered an explicit action to clear the interval. So that's how you clear the interval. You can also use certain logics within the set interval function where you can maintain a counter like counter which starts with 0, and then as you are triggering this set interval, you can also increment the counter, and you can also add some conditions where if the counter is greater than 5, in that case do a clear interval on the time interval handler, right? So you need to have a reference for the set interval function to clear it. Likewise, you need to have a reference for set timeout function to clear it. So I'm going to clear this interval by passing in the handler name. So after it has reached 6, the counter has reached 6, that's when it's going to clear the interval. So let's take a look at it. We don't have to clear the interval now manually. It's going to clear after the fifth iteration. So let's do that. So it has called it once, twice, and it will be called for till it reaches 6. So yeah, now it's going to be cleared. So there's no logging of that because I haven't logged anything in this condition, but let's do that as well. So console.log clearing the set interval after 6 seconds. Let me do that again. So you can see that once it's actually it's not 6 seconds, it's 12 seconds because we are calling it for every 2 seconds, but yeah, that's fine. We can also change this to a 1 second, make this trigger every 1 second, and make the counter increment for every second, and clear the interval after 6 seconds. Yeah, so we are clearing the interval like that. So this is the main difference between set timeout and set interval. And these are used as timing events. And the scenarios where you can use these are when you are building something related to like a clock down, stopwatch, or anything that has time restricted or time intensive functionalities. You can use these functions. So yeah, I hope this part is clear, and we'll be discussing about other topics in the coming tutorials. So stay tuned for that. Hey guys, if you have learned something from this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to my channel. I'll be posting more content on web development on a weekly basis. That's it from this video, and I'll see you in the next one.
chanter